So, Professor Nyhan, this delayed count is coming. We've known it was going to come for many months now because of this pandemic, because so many people will vote by mail in record numbers. So we get to election night, we have the vote that we can count that night, and we now know that because even some ballots in some states aren't even opened until election day, it's going to take, there's no question about whether it will or not, it's going to take some days or perhaps weeks. What Donald Trump laid out yesterday, the president said, in that space, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say we shouldn't have had mail-in voting. Here's one story. He'll have an anecdotal story about something that happened in one state and use that as evidence that mail-in voting is fraudulent. So what do you see as a professor of government happening in that space from election day until date unknown when all the votes are counted?
I don't think we have any idea. Barton has laid out the possible scenarios, and they're very grim. It's going to be essential for the public to demand a fair and complete count in that moment. That is the ultimate constraint on potential abuses of power in that time. It's a period of unique vulnerability, that period between when the votes are first cast and when we have an ultimate resolution. And as Barton has suggested, there's a potential for the president and his allies to destabilize that process, to sow chaos, and to then use that chaos as a pretext to try to undermine the validity of the result if it goes against them, or to try to change the outcome of the election. And I want to be clear, this is a democratic emergency. Sometimes you see things on television and maybe they're hyped up a little more than people think. This is something that experts are incredibly alarmed about. My colleagues who study the erosion of democracy in other countries are terrified of what they're seeing in the United States. This is straight out of the textbooks of how countries slide out of democracy and into authoritarianism. The peaceful transfer of power is the core of democracy. We depend on losers acquiescing, stepping down, and recognizing their defeat. That is the core of democracy itself. Donald Trump has told us what he would do under those circumstances. The question is, what will his allies do? This is a time for choosing for every person of good faith in either party to decide whether they are for democracy or not. And there will be all sorts of confusion and complication. We're going to hear about naked ballots and mail-in ballots and 100 other permutations of the uncertainty that the president is going to try to create around this process. But ultimately, what the question is, for Republicans and for all Americans, is, do you believe in the peaceful transfer of power? Do you believe incumbents should step down when they lose? Or do you believe this is a country that is no longer a democracy? That's the simple question we face right now.
Well, so far the answer to that largely has been silence in terms of his allies. Mitt Romney, as he often does, came out yesterday and said the president's statements were unacceptable. It's unthinkable that we wouldn't have a peaceful transfer of power. But beyond that, not much from Senate or congressional Republicans. You know, Professor, I think a question a lot of people have as they're watching this morning is, what should the country be doing now to prepare itself, to brace itself, not as an anti-Trump political question, but as a constitutional question, as a question of stabilizing the democracy? What should Democrats, what should Congress be doing? What should the courts be doing? What should local and state officials be doing to brace itself for the prospect of a president who says he may not leave?
It's a tough question. I think the media needs to treat this as the five-alarm fire for democracy that it is. I think Congress could potentially extend what's called the Safe Harbor Act to allow more time for disputed state electoral outcomes to be resolved. But ultimately, there is no umpire, as Barton said. There is no single person who can resolve this dispute, or institution even. And we're going to depend on the American people to come out in the streets by the millions if this election is taken away, if this result is undermined. And I can't believe I'm saying that as a scholar of American politics. I never thought I would be saying those words about the country that I study. We've had the peaceful transfer of power in a democracy for longer than any other country on earth, and it's now being called into question. These are very serious times, and I hope Americans of all political persuasions will understand that this is the bedrock of our system. Mitt Romney can't be the only person who speaks out against this. It has to be everyone. And if Trump's allies do abandon him, that will make a difference, right? He's floated many possibilities over the months and years since he took office that he hasn't followed through on because his allies weren't willing to back him. That's what's going to be critical in this moment. Donald Trump has told us who he is. Everyone else needs to decide ultimately whether they're on his side on this critical question of whether we are actually a democracy or not.
Well, and make no mistake.